As a leader, having effective meetings are one of the most important things, not just for yourself, but also for your team, because I think the biggest time sink in any organization is to have ineffective meetings. And without information being constantly communicated, this project is going to be constantly delayed. Now, meetings are one of the biggest time sinks for any organization and team. Most teams have too many meetings and there are too many people present at a meeting. In fact, to add to that, there is no clear agenda for the meeting. So what then usually happens is that meetings cause a big waste of time. A survey that was done showed that over 78% of the participants thought that they had too many meetings in a workday. And because of these meetings, about 51% of them had to do overtime work due to having too many meetings. We also want to look at what if we reduce the number of meetings, how would that impact the work of the team, right? Another survey was conducted over 76 companies over a course of 14 months, and this is what they found. If there was a change in the employee ratings after introduction of what we call meeting-free days, meaning let's say if there's 5 days in a week, what if we just totally blocked out one day to not have any meeting at all? Right? And this survey was in different areas, but let's just look at one area called productivity today. So by having one free meeting day, or rather one meeting-free day a week, this actually caused an increase in about 35% of productivity across the team. And what's more fascinating is when we increase this to having 2 meeting-free days, this doubled the productivity. It is now at 71%. But then as we go across, if we talk about like how if we drastically just reduce it to having like maybe no meetings a week, we kind of see diminishing returns once we exceed the 2 free meeting days a week kind of a policy. Right, so that's something interesting to know. So the optimal meeting-free day kind of a policy, if let's say you're looking to set this for your company or for your team, is actually a 2-day-a-week meeting-free kind of policy. Right, once it crosses this, then diminishing returns kind of happen. So I think if you talk about meetings, one of the most prominent, or if you just Google like art of meetings or how to have effective meetings, you will probably see on Google that Jeff Bezos of Amazon actually pops up because he has this very interesting meeting style. He likes to call it is like a memo style meeting, meaning there is no presentation slides in his meeting. Everybody has to come in and sit down and do silent reading for the first 20 minutes of every meeting. Nobody talks, right? And then only after going through that first 20 minutes of reading that memo, right? So of course that memo has to be populated with the meeting agenda pre-meeting. So everybody that's going to come into that meeting has access to this shared document and they will then input their points of discussion or what would they want to discuss as meeting agendas. Right? So after the first 20 minutes is done, then discussion takes place. That is how Amazon actually has their meeting styles. Right? So of course, I think in meetings, there are different teams, different departments, they have different kind of scopes and roles and responsibilities and the types of projects that they do. So of course, there's no one-size-fits-all in terms of meetings. And what I've done with my team is to kind of trial different styles of meetings. So I'm going to take you through some of them and how we found some of these useful and where we thought some of these things could be tweaked. But of course, again, this is very subjective to the kind of industry that you're in and the kind of team that you run. So when we tried the Amazon style internally for our team, what we felt was because there is this 20-minute silent reading kind of portion, right? So let's talk about the Amazon style. So in Amazon, what they do is they have this document that they prepare, 20 minutes of silent reading, and before that meeting, actually everybody keys in what they kind of want to talk about, right? So this 20 minutes of reading, perhaps it works for certain companies, but because in Property Lim Brothers, we are a very young team, we have a lot of Gen Zs and millennials, and even Gen Alpha in our team. The 20 minutes reading, we decided to try this, and we felt that perhaps this was a little bit too long, so we kind of evolved this to a different style where we would convert this 20 minutes of reading time into the briefing time by whoever was in charge of that meeting agenda point, right? So the person will be briefing about the meeting instead. The key takeaway for this was the meeting agenda needs to be prepared before every meeting. Meaning, if let's say you're going to come into a meeting and you're looking at each other in the room and you're asking, what are we discussing today? Then I think that is a failed meeting even before it begins. Right? So it's very important have the agenda clearly set, have everyone who's going to be present for the meeting input their points of discussion. Because if there's no points of discussion, then actually this meeting does not need to happen at all. Right? So that again is a way that you can cut down unnecessary meetings, although they could have been scheduled like on a weekly or maybe a bi-weekly kind of basis. So the next style that we tried and we kind of evolved it to was what we call, I call it the PLB meeting agenda template. Right? So in this template, later on we'll go a bit deep dive, but basically there are three main things to talk about. The agenda has to be present, so everybody who is involved in the meeting key in the agenda. The second thing is during the meeting, there has to be minutes that needs to be taken. So we need to assign a minute taker, right? So of course, it can be a rotational basis, it can be a dedicated person. You can see how that kind of works out for your team. The most important thing is before you sum up every meeting, before the end of every meeting, we need to make sure there are three things. Number one, there should be next steps. Next steps meaning what are the actionables required of each individual that's present in the meeting. And number two is when would this be due? That means we call this the next check-in date. So during the next check-in date, the team would meet again and they would then share on the progress of their deliverables. Has it been done? Is there a need to extend or has there been a delay? And lastly, it's what we call the project or the task due date. So due date means that it is the finishing line of the project. It's when this project needs to be launched or this task needs to be completed, right? So that's a little bit different from the next check-in date. So if you look at it, there are three main segments. So there is a before meeting prep, there is a during meeting, and then there is a before the meeting ends. So what I'll do is I'll attach a free resource in the link below. You can actually head over there and download this meeting template and you can try it out with your team. Let me know how it works for you. All right. So moving on, the last one is when you have what we call bigger type of projects. So at PLB, I call this mega projects, where it involves multiple teams, maybe like 5 to 6 different teams, from graphics team to the creative ads team to the video team, maybe my digital marketing team, and so on and so forth. So these are bigger projects where there needs to be a certain project like task tracker set up to manage the entire team. What we want to dive deeper is to look at what are the three biggest pitfalls of each and every meeting. So the first one is just now what we talked about. There are too many people in a meeting. So we want to dive a bit deeper and see how then should the people be decided, like who should attend a meeting, all right? The second thing is there are too many meetings happening, right? And the third thing is meetings without direction. So we kind of cover a little bit of that in terms of setting agendas before we head into meetings. So what should meetings look like? In each and every meeting, only the key people need to be involved. And what do we mean by key people? So key people are the ones that will be contributing to the discussion or to that meeting. If they're just going to be there just to download information, then sometimes these kind of meetings can be translated either via a Slack message, via a company memo, instead of gathering a big group of people and sitting there for the next 1 hour. All right. The second thing is there should be a planned agenda and the next steps moving forward before the end of every meeting. And the third thing is timeline tracking, which is your next check-in dates and your due dates. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into that shortly. So the three key takeaways here is we want to make sure that we talk about who needs to be in every meeting. Before you call for a meeting, you kind of decide that. Second thing, the next check-in dates and the due dates. And the third thing is that agenda needs to be set very clearly. How do we then define types of meetings and who needs to be in this kind of meetings and what is discussed in each type of these meetings? I've broken it down into 4 types. So first is what we call the sync-up meetings. These are typically short, 15 to 20 minutes, and it's usually just for green lights, red lights. And usually in sync-up meetings, it is done between the management team or your reporting manager, and it's basically to get clearance to move ahead with certain tasks or to get approvals for certain things. This is also when you can also request for help. Let's say you are facing a roadblock. This is when you can also raise this up to your leader. And lastly, if there are going to be delays in a specific task or project, this is also the time to kind of bring it up. But take note that sync-up meetings, because they are short in nature, it is not meant for long and detailed type of discussions. It's mainly, I would say, 80 to 90%, they're just to seek approval and it's for you to move ahead. Number 2 is discussion meetings. So these are longer, generally an hour, sometimes even an hour and a half. And these kind of meetings usually do not require the management team involved. It's usually done between the teammates and perhaps their reporting manager or the project IC. Usually relates to things like doing brainstorm discussions before you start off a certain project, or maybe there's an agenda to update everyone in the team, or when there is maybe certain challenges that you're facing. So one of the key questions you will know when you need a discussion meeting is, let's say the team is working and they face a certain roadblock that they cannot solve. Let's say there are 3 teammates in the team, okay? So perhaps this project, let's say this project team, right, let's call them project team A. Let's say there are 3 individuals in the team, one person being the project IC and the other 2 are teammates. So if let's say these 2 teammates are working on a task and they have also discussed with the project IC, and at the individual level, perhaps they can't solve this, and it's really a huge major roadblock for the team. This is when they can then call for a discussion meeting, right? So in the discussion meeting, again, before the meeting is set, the agenda needs to be set. So what is the big problem that we're facing today that we're going to be discussing? And after, of course, discussing this problem, there needs to be solutions that have been derived, and we can then move ahead to work on this certain solution, right? So this is where brainstorm happens. So during discussion, perhaps teammate A and teammate B, they'll be throwing out ideas together with the project IC. They'll be having discussions and they can come up with multiple solutions. And I think one of the ways also when we have certain discussions is to make sure that there is a clear facilitator in the discussion. If not, the discussion is going to go nowhere. You're going to end up back in square one. So usually the project IC takes on the role also as a facilitator of the discussion, right? So those are discussion meetings. The third one is what we call briefing meetings. So sometimes briefings, if they are not very complex in nature or not time sensitive in nature, briefings can actually be done via a memo as well. But let's say today the team is going to host a mega convention, for example, like what PLB does. We held a new launch convention recently, just a couple of months back, and this was an activation of the entire PLB, like all 130 teammates, right? So before convention day, perhaps a week, there was a need to hold a briefing meeting. Generally, it should be less than an hour. The topics are usually kept at high level, right? So we shouldn't be going into details when we're having briefings. So it's just a one-way communication usually. And towards the end, perhaps there's a small Q&A segment if it's necessary, or if let's say the teammates on the ground have certain questions that they're asking the events team or the project team in charge, right? So briefings are basically to communicate certain objectives, or also to talk about maybe certain product launches or service launch, like I mentioned earlier, or if we're holding an event like a new launch convention which had over 1,000 people coming, right? And it's also time sensitive because everybody really needs to be aligned before the event happens. So in this case, usually not all 130 teammates will attend, but generally what we'll do is to have the department ICs attend this meeting. Once they have gotten the information, they will just disseminate this to their internal teams, right? So it kind of looks like this. Basically, the project IC will conduct a briefing, right? And the briefing is basically to the department ICs of the different teams. And then when they head back, they will then share this with their individual teams, right? So by doing this, it keeps the meeting short as well, and things can move forward efficiently, all right? Okay, next one is what we call one-to-one meetings. So one-to-ones, usually I think they are done in 2 main formats. Number one is a casual format, meaning it's just maybe like a quarterly catch-up over lunch with a certain teammate. And the other setting is a slightly more formal one. Maybe there's a certain review, or it's a feedback session that you need to meet a teammate because maybe he or she hasn't been performing well at work. Generally, I would say maybe a 30 to 90 minute kind of block, really depending on where this is kind of going, whether it's the discussion or the conversation needs to take a longer period. So one example of this is usually when you have quarterly meetups or monthly kind of catch-up sessions, right? So I think this is quite straightforward, right? And this usually happens between a leader and the teammate that's involved, right? That's why it's called a one-to-one. Generally, I think in PLB what we adopt is that if it's a constructive feedback kind of session, it should be done through a one-on-one. But on the flip side, if it's a praise If it's a praise, we usually do it in a more public setting, like that in a Slack channel or maybe in a team meeting where we share certain good compliments or good feedback to the team. Next, we're going to move on to how do we then have effective meetings. So we've came up with a 3-step process. Basically, before a meeting, what should you do? During a meeting, what should we do? And before ending a meeting, what should we do, right? So let's talk about before. So it's important that everyone who is going to be present at that meeting contributes to the meeting agenda. Basically, you will create a shared document, whether it's on Notion, whether it's on Google Docs, right? Create a shared document, have everyone who's attending key in their points of discussion into that shared document, right? And this shared document should be ready when the meeting starts, right? So when you kickstart the meeting, whoever has contributed that point, we will then go around the table and have that person share their point of discussion. Right? So most importantly is during the meeting, there needs to be someone that's appointed as the meeting minutes taker. Right? So there are a few ways to do it. Usually how we do it in my team is that we'll go on a rotating basis. Let's say person A or teammate A is taking minutes today. In the subsequent weeks, we'll rotate it around to B, C, and D. Right? So another thing is, let's say it comes to a point where teammate A has finished presenting his or her point, he or she can then resume the duties of being the minutes taker. And the last part is after the entire discussion is done, the entire meeting is going to be ending, right? Or if let's say you have overrun for some reason and you cannot cover all the points, one of the key things that has helped our team to move forward with our projects and our tasks is to ensure that even if there is not enough time, set aside that last maybe like 2 to 3 minutes, just quickly set these 3 things. Number 1, what are the next steps for everyone? So this is clearly laid out in the meeting minutes. Number 2, when is the next check-in date? Meaning, when is the team going to meet next? Is it next week? Is it 2 weeks from now? Is it 3 days later? Right, so when are the next check-in dates? Because without a check-in date, it means all the actionables, the next steps, will not have a timeline, and the teammates who are assigned to the various actionables will not know how to prioritize their tasks amongst the other things that they have on their plate. So this is one of the most critical things when you're having a meeting, to set clear actionables, next steps, and also when this next check-in date is going to happen. And thirdly, just to kind of remind everyone again, when is the due date of this project? Later on, we'll also talk about in terms of bigger, large-scale projects where there are multiple timelines running, how does that kind of work as well. All right, so for a simple meeting, this should be the 3 kind of phases that you go through a meeting. And before you end every meeting, remember these 3 steps. Okay, now let's talk about a bigger type of project. Let's say there's the mega project, right? And there's going to be multiple timelines, multiple tasks, or multiple mini projects within a mega project, right? So like one example of this project that we had was what we called our marketing revamp kind of project, where we rebranded our entire marketing strategies and campaigns for the team, right? So this involved the video team, the marketing team, the brands team, the graphics team, even our realtor growth team, because this was a global kind of change across the entire organization. And it was a very big project that will probably take us the next 3 to 6 months. Right, so what we did was, this is kind of how it looks like. So this is the mega project that we have. We're going to do this certain task. And we broke it down into perhaps, let's say there's 3 different kind of mini projects, or you can call them tasks within the projects. Right, so for example, if this is the project due date, and we know we have maybe 3 months to achieve this project due date, then when we look at the different tasks, so let's say this is task 1, task 2, and task number 3, the question would be then, how do we set the next check-in dates within these different tasks? So because we're all aligned to a common project launch date or project due date, for each individual teams, when we're looking at their individual tasks, we would then need to plan their projects accordingly, meaning task 1 should have check-in dates that are perhaps in this format, and they would finish their task here, because perhaps maybe task 1 will lead on to this portion where the second team would require that task 1 to be done before they can complete task 2, right? So this is where we will plot out what we call check-in dates along the way, and this is their project due date at the end of the day. Right? So what it means is that it is a reverse engineering kind of process. So if let's say we had maybe 10 weeks to work on task 2, our check-ins might have to be spaced out accordingly, meaning let's say if it's split into 3 check-ins, then each check-in could be maybe a period of 3 weeks, right? If let's say it's a shorter time frame, let's say you only have 4 weeks, then of course the check-ins would be different. If let's say there are 3 check-ins here, or maybe 2 check-ins, then each one would take a shorter period. So maybe this would be like a 1.5 week, 1.5 week, and then 1 week, right? So that we work backwards towards a common due date to ensure that all the tasks would align up, right? I mean, this is of course a different topic altogether, which relates to project management, but meetings are actually part of project management. That's how we move team projects forward. These 2 important things are adhered to, meaning your check-in dates and our due dates. Every task without due date has no end to it. That means the teammate will not know how and when to prioritize a certain task, because everybody, if you look at the team, has so many other things on their plate, right? So they will need to know a given time frame to be working within so that they can prioritize that task. So next, we're going to talk about meeting etiquette. Let's say you have been assigned a task, right? Referring back to this example, what if you couldn't meet this due date or this check-in date? What should the next steps be? Although it seems like it's just one task that's not being able to be completed in that certain time frame, generally in bigger type of projects, this would snowball and chain effect the rest of the tasks that might require this certain task to be done before the next one can kind of move ahead. Right? So it's important to use these 4 steps. So number 1, the teammate that's in charge of this action or this deliverable needs to report this to the project manager or the leader that's in charge and explain that, John, I'm sorry, I can't meet the due date for this specific task, and this is the reason why, because I had this urgent, like last minute webinar, maybe like video that I had to edit. For example, if let's say this is a video teammate, and because of this, the task that I was assigned, I can't complete this on time. Right? So with this knowledge, and at the same time also proposing the solution for this. So a solution could be things like, is it okay if we get another teammate to come in to help? Because I see that teammate B has already completed his task. Should I get him to help on this? And with that, also, when is that new due date that you're going to propose? So you're going to propose 2 things, basically a solution, and the second thing would be, when is this next due date that your task can be completed? Right? Because with this, then your leader or the project IC can then push this into the team and inform everyone, hey, teammates A's task is going to be a bit delayed. Please all be informed. So let's all work accordingly and shift the timelines around. Right? So because if there is a silo kind of a mindset, that means that the entire team might be waiting on your task or this person's task, and without information being constantly communicated, this project is going to be constantly delayed, or it's just going to go into a beast where nobody knows what's kind of happening, right? So sometimes, especially as the project gets bigger, the more people you have in a team, it's even more important to over-communicate, right? So what we do at our team is we set up Slack channels for each and every project that we're undertaking, and then everybody can kind of communicate there and work together in that fashion, right? So keeping everybody informed regularly. So the 4 steps again, the first one, basically update your leader, okay? And then number 2, update your leader, meaning tell them why there's a delay and the reason behind it, okay? The second thing is to talk about share a solution. So propose a solution, and at the same time with this solution, what is the new due date that the task is going to be completed by, right? And the third thing is, let's say I'm that leader, I would then share this information with the team. Right, so everyone is kind of aligned and informed that, okay, this task is going to be delayed, this is the new date, let's all move things around to fit this. Right, so just using these 3 simple steps, if every teammate does this, the project team who's working on it will be constantly updated and they will know how things are progressing. So we covered quite a fair bit of things today. So let's kind of summarize what we kind of learned. Right, so the first thing is we talked about the meeting agenda template, how to hold an effective meeting, right? The 3 steps before the meeting, make sure the agenda is filled up, teammates input their points of discussion. During the meeting, allocate a minute taker, can be a rotational basis or it could be a fixed person. I leave that up to you and your team, depending on how you guys work. The third thing is before the end of every meeting, even if there's a shortfall of time or the meeting has overrun, take that 1, 2 or 3 minutes to tie down on these 3 things. It shouldn't take you more than like 2 minutes actually. First, list down all the next steps. Next steps are basically the actionables of each and every teammate required. Second, next check-in date, meaning all these actionables, when are they due and when is that date, right? So this helps everyone prioritize the tasks that they have on their plate. And third is just to kind of remind everyone, hey guys, this project needs to launch on this date, so all let's work together towards this date, right? So those 3 things, next steps, your next check-in date and the project due date. As we go through this entire art of meeting kind of a segment, it's important to also let your team understand there are certain do's and don'ts, like house rules to meetings, right? So one of the do's is to ensure everybody is gathered in the meeting room 5 minutes or even 10 minutes before the meeting starts. If they gotta grab coffee, go to the washroom, right? Make sure all those things are done before and they're seated, right? So the meeting should start on time. If there's a teammate that's late, the rest of the teammates who are already present in the meeting should start. We should not wait for that teammate, because what we realize over time is if we do not start on time and nobody respects that time, it will just snowball into basically like the meetings are always going to be delayed, right? And nobody adheres to the start time of a meeting, right? So that's punctuality. Second thing is what we talked about earlier in step 1, which is the preparation of that shared meeting document. Basically, the meeting agenda has been laid out. So meaning when you enter in a meeting, you are very clear, everybody is very clear what is the direction of today's meeting. We shouldn't have the question or having people look around the room and, hey guys, what are we talking about today? That means preparation is not done. All right, so that's a don't. Third thing is to look at the 4 meeting types we have kind of came up with. Of course, there are certain meetings that would be a hybrid of 2 types perhaps, but generally just for learning purposes, we've kind of segmented into these 4 types. So using that 4 types of meeting, it should help you decide how long each meeting should be, who should be in this meeting, and what the content of that meeting should be like. Just to kind of summarize again, the 4 types of meetings. Sync-ups, basically they are red light, green light meetings. Short, 15-30 minutes. Management team should be present because these are usually decision-making meetings. And usually it's between the leader and the management team. So teammates are generally not involved in this kind of meetings. They are usually at leadership level. Number 2 are discussion meetings. So these are check-ins, these are update meetings. Generally they're longer because from an hour to maybe an hour and a half, because there are certain challenges the team is facing and a discussion or brainstorming session needs to take place to find a solution. Generally, this do not involve the higher management. It usually is between the project leader and the teammates. Third, briefing meetings. So early on, we also talked about briefings can also be conducted via a memo, via an email, via Slack, basically a written form. But if let's say it's time sensitive and we really need everybody to be aligned within, let's say there's a mega event or convention coming up, then we could call for a team briefing. And the team briefings generally involve the project team or the project IC briefing the other leaders or the other mini ICs who are involved to then translate this information down to their teammates after the briefing, right? So we don't need, like if your team has 100 people, the briefing meeting shouldn't have 100 people there. Perhaps 10%, maybe all the leaders are supposed to be present in this meeting. And last one, quite straightforward one-to-ones, basically casual catch-ups over meals, maybe lunches. Or it could be a feedback session for a certain teammate, perhaps to let him or her know that he hasn't been performing well and maybe see how if he or she is facing any roadblocks and how we can also support this teammate. Alright, so these are usually done at the leadership level, perhaps with a teammate that's involved. Those are the 4 types of meetings. As a leader, having effective meetings are one of the most important things, not just for yourself, but also for your team, because I think the biggest time sink in any organization is to have ineffective meetings, right? So a simple math is that if let's say every week you have 5 hours of meeting, 1 hour each day, and across a month, that stacks up to 20 hours of meetings. So if meetings are not effective, means these 20 hours are burnt and they're down the drain. So if you want to learn more about leadership tips, about how to manage your teams effectively, do give me a follow on my socials. See you next time.